Hi there. I just read an interesting comment that To Be Serious posted about consciousness. So, what is consciousness? That's the biggie. My guess is that when we can answer that question satisfactorily, we'll have moved our thinking to a place where many of the other imponderables resolve themselves. Questions like, is it a choice between material and sacred? Is there a concept of God that isn't alienating? What can be our fullest response to the cosmos? So what's the problem? I think it lies in the metaphors that seduce us into thinking that consciousness is a thing beyond the body, that directs and observes our physical and embodied life, that listens to our narrated life. It's the experiencer of our experiences. But this way of looking at consciousness is still grounded in dualistic assumptions. That is, that consciousness is something separate, and it's acted upon in some mysterious way by a director or observer. But that begs the question, observed or directed by whom? An inner second level consciousness that observes the doings of that first level consciousness, and so on with levels all the way down? An infinite regress of nested observers within the body, an endless search of something that finally experiences our experience? Maybe, but maybe it's a higher consciousness, an overmind, some disembodied transcendental consciousness. But that leaves us in the classic Cartesian bind of how could such a transcendent thing interact with matter? The difficulty leads us in short order to inventing a one-word answer to this problem, and that word is God, but that device is no more satisfactory than saying the answer is the answer. Both solutions, the infinite regress and the transcendental idea, result from our thinking being captured in that tar pit of dualistic thinking. So that is what we have to try and get past to make progress, in my opinion, with this and a lot more of the hard problems like the mind-body, free will determinism, natural, supernatural. We escape both of these problems if we approach consciousness as an emergent property, a non-material process or ordering that emerges from the complexity of our brain, as I'll try to show. First, what is the nature of emergent properties of complex systems? It's order that emerges from its elements, but is more than them. It can't be reduced to them or predicted from them, more than the sum of its parts. The thing is that we usually, almost habitually, think of order as being imposed by a mind or intelligence onto disordered components, from the top down. It's implicit in the hierarchical metaphors we use to describe order. For example, the way human civil society organises itself, from the workplace with its managers, to the army with its generals, to nations with sets of laws. We use metaphors like order being imposed on chaos. This is also found in the case of the form of a poem or the design of a building. There always seems to be a mind planning, designing, top down. The theory of evolution's greatest hurdle is against this expectation that complexity can only come from the top-down design. But if we look again at nature, or at research into computer simulations of complexity, we find countless examples, really, of complexity arising in arrangements of elements individually following simple rules, yet giving rise to order. Patterns that are more than the sum of their parts. Examples from coral reefs to beehives, shoals of fish, flocks of birds, all seem to have an overall order, but they arise from individual responses. Large-scale order emerging from small-scale interaction, with very simple rules. For example, the Mandelbrot set is a set of beautiful complexity, but it's generated by a rule of less than one line long. Yet a design of infinite dimensions emerges from that rule. In human groups, it's very important, from the behaviour of crowds to the invisible hand of the market. That's all emergent, their ordered complexity arising bottom up. This is very interesting, but it gets really interesting when we look at computer simulations with neural networks. Neural networks have been studied for 50 years or more, trying to simulate thinking by copying brain architecture. Computer chess programs, share market and weather prediction programs all use neural networks, and they can outperform humans in many respects, even though they have had no strategy programmed into them. It emerges. But this is very limited and not even the shadow of the human mind. Why not? Because they are so tiny and relatively disconnected in comparison to the human brain or animal brains. It's a matter of interconnectivity. It's reasonable to expect that the human brain, with its millions, billions of neurons, not hundreds as in computer simulations, making over 10,000 connections, not just tens as with computer nets, is likely to have an emergent property or emergent properties that far outstrip computers. And one of these could well be consciousness of self. But the big problem, called the hard problem of consciousness, is that of qualia, the feeling of things. How does a physical action of a neuron in my brain or of neurons in my brain get to feel like something to me? Again, who or what is registering this feeling? In this question, though, Cartesian dualism is sending me to find the answer someplace else, in the mind-soul area. Isn't the answer here, though, in the mind as an emergent property of our brain, our physical brain? If such an emergent entity were feeding the information it generates from our six senses into itself, as of course even the simple computer neural nets do, the question, what does a particular neural detection sensation feel like, is a dualistic error, because the detection is the sensation, the feeling. No added something, no ghost in the machine is even needed. With the removal of these dualistic questions, the problem of mind-body is also removed. In their turn, the neural entities, our brains, are so much more than mere neurons, and this does give rise to some intriguing questions. At what point, for example, does the interconnected network of human intelligences itself generate a collective emergent consciousness? Has it already? A higher order collective consciousness, a sort of Teilhardian noosphere or a Jungian anima mundi, world soul, or James Lovelock's Gaia. Not in the Platonic realm of ideas, but generated out of stuff, not divinity, emergent, like our consciousness from the interconnected matter. The temptation to slip back into dualistic thinking is strong, but this is a non-material, naturally evolving, emergent property, the property of matter, human standing feet in the mud and head in the stars. We humans have neural networks of such complexity that not only are we aware, but that awareness is turned on to itself, and we have self-awareness. Will this also happen in the collective networks, which have become so much more complex and interconnected with the digital revolution? Or even more provocatively, maybe the silicon-based nets, such as the internet, will have their own separate network separate from carbon-based living nets, their own anima computii, the soul of the machine. I can feel the matrix revolt coming on. But can we already see the evidence that the network of self-consciousness within the living world has given rise to higher order emergent consciousness? Some say so. And if it has emerged, is it conscious yet of itself? Would we know? Are we to suppose that our neurons know that they are part of an enormous dance of energy that forms our personal individual self-awareness? No, what has emerged is so much more than mere cellular reaction to stimuli. But this of course suggests that the emergent collective is equally beyond animal consciousness, as animal consciousness is beyond cellular stimuli response. Maybe, though, this emergent collective is the source of what we humans have intuited as the Godhead, the sacred. The idea of emergence corrects our dualistic error and offers, I think, an opportunity to rethink ourselves past the arguments that continually turn our speculations on our highest intuitions to ashes. Unending misunderstandings as we chop logic and egos with labels of deism, theism, atheism, positive and negative, God, no God, this God, that God, evolution, intelligent design. They're all going nowhere because neither side can recognize their dualistic roadblocks. Their irritable debates on both sides are, to purloin Macbeth, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But maybe this is not a dichotomy. This earth-born wholeness or holiness is a re-sanctification of our world that many of us are seeking. not a divinity arising as an otherworldly, Gnostic realm, a heaven that only deigns to touch earth on its own terms, and which damns our lives as fallen, but a sacredness that we co-create and infuse and participate in. Is this how we fetch soul back from heaven and recognise its true home in earth, in humanity? In the old Christian metaphors, is it the redemption of matter, the meaning of the incarnation, our return to an earthly Eden? Thanks.